Gormenghast. Chapter 47. 1. As the days went by, Titus was becoming more and more difficult to control. In the long dormitories where after dark the boys of his own age would light their shielded candles, squat in groups, perform strange rites or eat their pilfered cakes, Titus was no watcher of the scene. He was no mere watcher from the safety of his bed, when in fierce and secret grapple old scores were settled in deathly silence, while, in his cubicle by the dormitory door, the formidable janitor slept like a crocodile upon his back. The erratic breathing of this man, his tossings and turnings, his very wheezings and mutterings were an open book to Titus and his confederates. They all conveyed a certain depth of sleep, which at its deepest was shallow enough. But it was silence that they feared, for silence meant that his eyes were open in the darkness. As sacred as the fact that there had always been an Earl of Gormenghast, and always will be, and that when the time came he would be virtually unapproachable, a man out of range both socially and for reasons of his intrinsic difference, as sacred as all this was the tradition that as a boy the Earl of Gormenghast must be in no way treated as something apart. It was the pride of the Groans that their childhood was no time of cotton wool. As for the boys themselves, they found little difficulty in putting this into practice. They knew that there was no difference between themselves and Titus. It was only later that they would think otherwise. And in any case, what a child may become in his later years is of little interest to his friends or his foes. It is the world of here and now that matters most. And so Titus fought with the rest in the breathless dormitory, and from time to time was caught out of his bed and was caned by the janitor. He took the risk and he took the punishment. But he hated it. He hated the ambiguity of it all. Was he a lord or an urchin? He resented a world in which he was neither one thing or another. That his early trials would fit him for his responsibilities in later life made no appeal to him. He was not interested in his later life, and he was not interested in having responsibilities. Somehow or other the whole thing was unfair. And so he said to himself, "All right, so I'm the same as everyone else, am I? Then why do I have to report to Steerpike every evening in case I'm lost? Why do I have to do extra things after classes when none of the others have to? Turning keys in rotten old locks, pouring wine all over turrets, walking here and there until I'm tired. Why should I do all this extra if I'm not any different? It's a rotten trick." The professors found him difficult, wayward, and on occasions insolent. All except Belgrove, for whom Titus had a fondness and an inexplicable respect. 2.
"Are you thinking of doing any work this afternoon, or were you planning to spend it in chewing that end of your pen, dear boy?"
asked Belgrove, leaning forward over his desk and addressing Titus.
"Yes, sir,"
said Titus with a jerk. He had been far away in a daydream.
"Do you mean, 'Yes, sir, I'm going to work,' or 'Yes, sir, I'm going to chew my pen, dear boy'?"
"Oh, work, sir." Belgrove flicked a lock of his mane back over his shoulder with the end of his ruler.
"I am so pleased," he said. "You know, my young friend, that one day when I was about your age, I was suddenly taken with the idea of concentrating upon the paper which my old schoolteacher had set me. I don't know what gave me the idea. I had never thought of doing such a thing before. I had heard of people who had tried it, you know, of paying attention, of putting their minds to the work in hand, but I never thought of doing it myself. But, and here you must listen, my dear boy, what happened? I'll tell you. I found that the paper which my dear master had set me was quite simple. It was almost an insult. Yeah, I concentrated more than ever. When I had finished, I asked for more, and then more again. All my answers were quite perfect. And what happened? I became so fascinated at finding I was so clever that I did too much and became ill. And so I warn you, and I warn the whole class, take care of your health. Don't overdo it. Go slow, or you may have a breakdown just as I had long ago, when I was young, dear boys, and ugly just as you are, and just as dirty too. And if you haven't got your work finished by 4 o'clock, Master Groan, my dear child, I shall be forced to keep you in until 5.
Yes, sir, said Titus, and at that moment he felt a dig in the back. Turning, he found that the boy behind him was passing him a note. He could not have chosen a much worse moment for it, but Belgrove had closed his eyes in a resigned and lordly way. When Titus unfolded the scrap of paper, he found it was no message, but a crude caricature of Belgrove chasing Miss Irma Prunesqualler with a long lasso in his hand. It was very feebly drawn and not particularly funny, and Titus, who was in no mood for it, felt suddenly angry, and screwing it up, threw it back over his shoulder. This time Belgrove's attention was caught by the pellet.
What was that, dear boy?
Just a screwed-up piece of paper, sir.
Bring it up here to your old master. It will give him something to do, said Belgrove. He can work away at it with his old fingers, you know. After all, there is nothing much he can do until the class ends.
And then, musing aloud,
Oh, babes and sucklings, babes and sucklings, how tired of you your old headmaster gets.
The pellet was retrieved and passed to Titus, who got up from his desk. And then suddenly, when he had approached to within a few feet of the headmaster's desk, he put the screwed-up drawing into his mouth, and with a gulp swallowed it. "I've swallowed it, sir." Belgrove frowned, and an expression of pain flitted across his noble face.
You will stand on your desk, he said. I am ashamed of you, Titus Groan. You will have to be punished.
When Titus had been standing on his desk for a few minutes, he received another tap upon the back. He had already been in trouble through the stupidity of the boy behind, and in a flash of anger, "Shut up!" he cried, and swinging around at the same instant, found himself staring at Steerpike. The young master of ritual had come silently through the door of the schoolroom. It was his duty to make a periodic round of the classes, and it was an understood thing that in this official capacity it was not for him to knock before he entered. Only a few boys had noticed Steerpike's arrival, but the whole class turned at the sound of Titus's voice. Gradually it dawned upon the class that the reason for the stiff, frozen position that Titus was in, his head turned sharply over his shoulder, his body swiveled around on the narrow pivot of his hips, his hands clenched, his head lowered angrily, that the reason for his tenseness was that his "shut up" must have been addressed to none other than the man with the skew-bald face, Steerpike himself. Standing upon the lid of his desk, Titus was in the unusual position of looking down at the face of this authority who had suddenly appeared as though out of the floor like an apparition. The face looked up at him, a wry smile upon the lips. The eyebrows raised a little, and a certain expectancy in the features, as though denoting that although Steerpike realized that it was impossible for the boy to have guessed who it was that had tapped him on the back, and was therefore guiltless of insolence, yet an apology was called for. It was unthinkable that the master of ritual should be spoken to in this way by anyone, let alone a small boy, whatever his lineage. But no apology came. For Titus, directly he realized what had happened, that he had cried "shut up" to the arch symbol of all the authority and repression which he loathed, knew instinctively that this was a moment in which to dare the blackest hell. To apologize would be to submit. He knew in the darkness of his heart's blood that he must not climb down. In the face of peril, in the presence of officialdom, age-old and vile, with its scarlet hands and his hunched shoulders, he must not climb down. He must cling to his dizzy crag until, trembling but triumphant in the enormous knowledge of his victory, he stood once more upon solid ground, secure in the knowledge that as a creature of different clay he had not sold his birthright out of terror. But he could not move. His face had gone white as the paper on the desk. His brow was sticky with sweat, and he was heavy with a ghastly tiredness. To cling to his crag was enough. He had not the courage to stare into the dark red eyes that, with the lids narrowed across them, were fixed upon his face. He had not the courage to do this. He stared over the man's shoulder, and then he closed his eyes. To refuse to say he was sorry was all that his courage could stand. And then, all at once, he felt himself to be standing at a strange angle, and opening his eyes he saw the rows of desks begin to circle in formation through the air, and then a far voice shouted as though from miles away, as he fell heavily to the floor in a dead faint.